It was the dawn of 1103, and the bloody whiff of betrayal was on the wind. The festivities of English and/or French and/or Norman King Robert had come to an end, festivities that by their martial nature had gotten everyone fired up for a bit of battle. They also just so happened to leave the finest warriors in the land in easy earshot of those who might want to organise a little extra round to the tournament. 5,000 men pledged to fight for Edwin the Bold of Mercia if he ensured that the next tournament was hosted by someone more English and more generous with their praise and prizes. Robert was fully aware of this growing conspiracy. He knew that Edwin would betray him, for indeed all Frenchmen knew that there was no honour beyond the Channel. So then, he could play his ultimate trump card. Present to the court evidence that Edwin was planning the murder of Merliswegen, the former King of England. Look, here is the blade with which the deed was to be done. Here are the instructions ready to be passed to hired thugs. Here is the forged will that leaves the old monarch's possessions to Edwin and... ignore that other name. Why did Robert have access to all these incriminating items? He had to insist people ignore that line of inquiry also, but the truth was quite clear. This hypocritical call-out sunk many a stomach in Rouen. Some guards rushed out of the castle without any orders. Probably going to arrest the murderer, Robert happily concluded, laughing heartily and alone amid a packed hall. The guards never returned, but news that half of England was rising up against Robert did. Duke Godwin of York, another claimant to the English throne, had joined the rebels, giving them more than enough men to defend against the army Robert was mustering in France, and plenty to defeat the doomed pro-Robert troops of England in the meantime. It was a familiarly hopeless situation for the poor, bouncy king, but by now he was well drilled on what to do at such low points. Through Paris he strutted, flanked by women whose beauty was matched only by their good value for money. Into the hall of King Philip they paraded, presenting the sullen monarch with some supposedly iconic golden horse models in barely used condition, and the news that Robert required just a few French men to resolve a minor issue. Although, he hastened to add, just to be safe, best send all the French men. Philip damned the day he had agreed to marry his heir to this clan of slack-jawed con artists and would-be barbarians, but such damning was tactfully silent, and instead all that was heard was his noble and honourable acceptance of Robert's truly heartfelt and deserving plea for aid. With King Philip's levy at his command, Robert could muster 8,000 against the 5,000 rebels besieging Westminster. The Yorkish men had sailed to Rouen to besiege the real seat of Robert's power, thus dividing the rebellion and giving Robert his chance for victory. Besides, he had cunningly brought his court with him to England, among them the English regent Adeline, who was able to produce something that was more truly iconic of House Normandy, a bastard child named William. This brought Robert's total up to 5. William the Bastard the Elder had been thoroughly upstaged, on the counts of offspring and mothers. These children could play their part for Normandy too. The infant Matilda was unknowingly betrothed to the 8-year-old Duke of Essex. Perhaps it wasn't the time to be organising such things, but perhaps Robert's authority allowed him to do what he wanted when he wanted. This argument deflected away the only objection Queen Mare was allowed to make. King Philip finally arrived with the rest of France's army, and together the two kings marched 10,000 men to recently fallen London for a decisive battle with the Mercians. There was little question that they would win, but amid all the day-to-day butchery of organising the victory, news slipped into camp here and there of strange goings-on in France. Philip had not only left some men behind, but those men were openly invading Robert's territory. Yes, the French king was not going to be taken advantage of anymore. As he had departed, he had slipped a letter to the kindly old Duke Etienne of Champagne overturning the legality of William the Bastard's conquest of Maine. House Dublin should thus take control of the region until the matter could be resolved. Robert's old foe, Duke Guillaume of Toulouse, wasn't going to miss a chance to avenge his previous disgrace in Maine and joined the new war. This was not ideal. With the impending loss of control of most of Normandy, on top of the ongoing loss of control of most of England, the things that Robert was actually king of seemed to be growing scarce. To stand any chance of putting Edwin back in his place, the place needed to be under Robert's control. That is to say, he needed to capture the Mercian capital of Leicester. That meant Normandy would have to endure, putting quite a lot of stress on Robert of Maine, by which I mean King Robert's son, who had been established as Count of Maine at a young age, for 'twas now proven to be the first step on the path to greatness after all. As you might imagine, the disorder across the realm impacted tax collection quite a bit, and Robert was quickly at the mercy of the moneylenders. The king reminded his followers that even he himself was working for free, so they should all follow his example. These followers eyed the golden crown encrusted with priceless jewels atop Robert's nodding head. Rouen had been taken by Yorkish troops, who had since been killed by the rampaging Toulousan troops. Who was in control now? No one, apparently, with even Robert's magistrates sneaking off to Paris. The law, or a version of it, would be applied by peasants' justice then, which for the capital of a great realm was not the best look. At least Robert managed to collect up the Mercian court from Leicester, placing them all in a big wooden cage that could be wheeled around upon the delighted insistences of King Philip. Now they just needed the big man himself to complete the collection. They moved to attack the Mercian army, which they outnumbered even more than last time, and defeated it soundly, just in time to hear that a group calling themselves the Thieves' Guild had taken control of the English-Norman capital. Robert, his hair greying and his mind tempered by these years of paranoia, war, and lobbying from betrayed mothers against Robert, was able to brush this development off. When asked why he was not so concerned, he insisted that he would take the good with the bad, as he always had done. No one could think of a time when he had done that, as opposed to taking the good and causing the bad, but there was something rather genuine about Robert's attitude, and something more kingly too. It was true that as his 50th birthday had come and gone, the on-again off-again King of England had become more introspective, taking time to reflect on lessons both fresh and well-aged from his life. Clearly he had made some enemies, and he really did want to rectify that, even if it was only to give himself a bit of peace and quiet. Thinking of old wisdom, he named the next child the Regent Adeline delivered to him, Orderic. After another solid victory over Edwin on the familiar fields near Hartlepool, he reviewed his troops and dismissed those he would not need, thus balancing the books and promising an eventual return from the depths of that perilous ocean they call debt. The men he still had, mostly paid for by King Philip or the Norman lords, defeated Edwin again outside his own capital, twice in quick succession, in fact. The Mercian cause was failing, and York had proven to be of no use to them. Robert spent time with his daughter Solène, encouraging her to read the words of God carefully, even if the other children thought it too timid a pastime for a future queen. God, Robert reminded her, was a fine ally to have when you needed to get things done, and he couldn't emphasize his low cost enough. Solène nodded along happily. The way she listened to him was unlike his court or his vassals. It was like she truly believed what he said, and even thought that he was clever for saying it. Truly his own offspring could recognize the greatness that spawned it. Such wholesome times were punctuated with good news. His men captured more Mercian territory, and his messengers brought him the apologies of Edwin the decreasingly bold. While Robert had a mind to punish the Duke further, his son and peoples were rather in dire need of help back on the continent. Paying taxes again was all the punishment Edwin got, for which he was actually very grateful, declaring a mercy and mercy to great applause. Meanwhile, Robert could promise Solène that the family would soon all be together again. Daddy, all 3 mummies, and a lot of strong, brave men would take her home and defeat the bad guys. Solène was elated, and Robert felt a strange, mutual feeling of happiness take hold of him. There was something about genuine appreciation that beat sycophancy every time. Too bad his court were too entitled and selfish to offer him anything more than the latter. At least Edwin was now being a good boy, taking command of the 5,000-strong army Robert had mustered and marching for the frozen keep at Le Mans, in which Prince Robert was held by the greedy troops of Champagne. The French host of nearly 6,000 soon arrived to contest their prize, and while they had the numbers on their side, to face Edwin of Mercia was no easy thing. Edwin had entrenched his men well, with stockades, trenches and stakes arrayed before his lines and camp. With the routes through these obstacles being only narrow, very few men could charge in either direction. Thus the fighting took place at range, with arrows flying this way and that as Frenchmen scurried up to the defensive line and released what shots they dared before rushing back under concentrated return fire, with shots from the huge English longbows breaking open their armour with ease. The French lost twice the number the English did in these skirmishes. Seeing the battle was making poor progress, some of the French troops fled the scene. Edwin saw his chance. He tipped the stockades over and levelled the rows of stakes, clearing the path for a mighty charge out into the open field. More and more French departed the failing project, allowing Edwin and company to press 1,000 or more man advantage against their chilly foe. A rout began, and the traitorous French were driven from Maine. Sparing Edwin had proven to be a wise decision indeed, for his services on the field of battle far outmatched any redemption that could be wrought by locking him in a dungeon. He could now be set to work clearing out the strongholds of Maine, while Robert made good on his promises of family time in Rouen, under the watchful eye of the Thieves' Guild, of course. As so often follows periods of war, an epidemic was spreading across Flanders into Normandy. Slow fever found its way up into the towers of Rouen to Robert's precious Solène. In constant pain she waited out the lengthening days, but she was rarely alone. With 4 parents and a few siblings still hanging around, her room remained rather busy. Busier still when members of the English and French court alike came to wish well to the princess and future queen. Solène admitted to Robert that such attention was uncomfortable for her, but Robert was quick to explain that these people around her were not to be feared, only to be used to better their family. As a queen, she would meet a great many people, and even a simple smile or kind word from such a position of power could compel the lesser folk to exert themselves day in day out in service to their betters. Solène believed him, for clearly such magic was at work in Robert's life, given that her 3 mothers were living in relative peace even with their vendetta unfulfilled. Indeed, Robert was actually working very hard to spend separate time with all 3, encouraging all not to kill each other or him. But quickly he realized that convincing them to like him could spell doom for his family, for their mutual complaints about him were all that unified them, preventing them from going after each other's children and God knows what else. Somehow he had to hold everything together, but not too tight. Never had he felt such pressure or stress as he did simply passing the time quietly in his own home. He didn't deserve this, he thought, but he couldn't quite think of whose fault all this was. After explaining the complex situation to Solène, she remarked that the best way to make everyone happy seemed to be to lie about everything. Robert beamed, knowing then that his daughter was destined for great things. A few months later, the defeated Champagne-Toulouse alliance finally surrendered their claim to Maine and returned home. After years of brutal tests, Robert was king of all England once more. The money was flowing, the court was starting to get itself back into working order, and Edwin was now busying himself and his men with another war in Wales. Ah yes, send a few thousand men, and my regards. Everything was back to normal. For now.